This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not dispense medical advice. Always seek the advice of a physician or other qualified health providers if you have any questions regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking such advice because of something you have heard on this podcast. Welcome to Prostate Cancer Real Talk. Did you know that in the U.S., 1 out of every 8 men will be diagnosed with prostate cancer during their lifetime? 1 out of 8. And black men are 50% more likely to develop prostate cancer in their lifetime and twice as likely to die from the disease. But hey, we're not here to quote statistics and tell you how tough prostate cancer can be. Rather, we are here to create a supportive community of survivors. A place where we can discuss the real-life coping methods from the perspective of a married couple who are living through it day by day. This is Prostate Cancer Real Talk, the Long Haulers. "20 years after surgery and still living their best life, meet David and Kathie Houchens. Powered by their faith and decades-long marriage, Dave and Kathie Houchens are here to share their story of inspiration and motivation with us. They believe that prostate cancer not only affects the patient, but also their spouses, children, and extended families. Dave and Kathie are eager to share their experiences of how they faced and dealt with Dave's diagnosis of prostate cancer over 20 years ago. The subtitle here is Hope. It is our pleasure to welcome to Prostate Cancer Real Talk, Dave and Kathie Houchens.
Thank you very much, Dennis, and welcome to our podcast. We're very pleased today to have a great couple who has gone through the prostate cancer experience over the past 20 years. We're pleased to introduce David and Kathie Houchens, and we're going to talk to them about their ongoing experience with prostate cancer. As you know, or you may not know, but Shay and I are somewhat newcomers. Dave sent me an email this week that was kind of funny. He said, "Welcome to the club that nobody wants to be a part of." That is the Prostate Cancer Club. But Shay and I have been going through this experience for the past almost 8 months or so. And we're going to talk to some folks that have been, we call them long haulers. So with that, I'm going to introduce Dave so he can talk to us a little bit about their experience, and then we'll hear from Kathie, because I will tell you that Kathie, as a wife, has some really unique perspectives, because she's talked to a lot of other wives and significant others that are going through this, and there's some great subject matter there. So, David, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience?
Okay, thank you, El. It's a real pleasure to be with you. I was, in my career, I was in cancer research for about 35 years. And when the PSA test finally came into being in the late 80s, I started asking my doctor to take a PSA test because I was aware of what the situation was somewhat in prostate cancer. And as it turned out, my PSA for a few years was higher than we think of. You always read that, well, it should be between 0 and 4. Well, that's a little bit of misinformation, because as men get older, your PSA can go above 4 and you don't necessarily have prostate cancer. Or in reality, as your PSA goes up and even gets up into the higher ranges, you may not have prostate cancer anyway. It could be a number of other things, like enlarged prostate, which occurs as men get older anyway. So I kept a watch on it once a year with my checkups. And ultimately, it got up into a range where I decided I should probably have a urologist check. And he checked, and they ultimately did a biopsy. And as it turned out, they didn't get any positive biopsy samples, but my PSA was still elevated. So watched it for about another 6 months, and then had another biopsy, actually by a different doctor, and he did get a positive. Now that was back in late 2001, August, something like that. And so he suggested that we probably have a surgical procedure or radiation, usual things. And well, as you may know, it's usually a urologist that does a biopsy on you. And so they are obviously surgeons, and they would certainly move in that direction. However, radiation at that time was not nearly as sophisticated as it is now. So I chose to have a prostatectomy, and that was also before robotic prostatectomy existed. So it was done by open prostatectomy, and so I had that procedure done in September of 2001. It was actually about 2 weeks after 9/11. Surgery went well, no problems, had the recovery, and really things worked as expected. In fact, I was fortunate in that I didn't have any incontinence after the surgery. And that's fairly rare.
Wow.
Most men do have incontinence for a period, but I did not have any incontinence, which was a plus feature. So we went on watching, having PSA checked over time. And my PSA, of course, after surgery, it should go down to non-detectable. It got down to 0.08 and then gradually started back up. When it got up a bit higher, I had talked to my doctor about other issues and so forth. But I ultimately got a medical oncologist on my team, and he was a doctor practicing out of Charlottesville, Virginia area. He had himself developed prostate cancer and had a very successful treatment, but with a lot of side effects. And he opened his own practice in the Charlottesville area. So it started going to him, and he was not under any restrictions by how he might function in treating, suggesting how people be treated, which frequently in a university setting or in a prostate cancer center, they're sort of controlled by what the institution decides is the best approach. My value had crept up from 0.08 up to about 0.45. And under his protocols, it went back down to about 0.25 and stayed there for 2 or 3 years and then started back up again slowly. So he suggested I have a scan that might determine where the growth was occurring since the prostate was gone. That scan showed that they found one node area that was down well outside of the prostate area. And so he suggested that I have what's called salvage radiation, which I did. That was with whole beam radiation over a 9-week period, 5 days a week. And I had that along with androgen deprivation therapy. Since that time, this 11, 12 years later, my PSA is non-detectable. And for all practical purposes, the disease is under control. I have my PSA checked now once a year, and other blood issues too, and everything seems to be in order, and I'm continuing that way.
For more information on Dave and Kathie Houchens and other Prostate Cancer Real Talk guests, go to our website, prostatecancerrealtalk.com.
So I want to bring Kathie in. When Dave was diagnosed with prostate cancer, I know we heard from Shay over the past couple of shows and how her reaction was. Tell us a little bit about your reaction, your perspective for other wives and significant others that are going through, and family members that are going through a diagnosis of prostate cancer?
Well, I'll start by saying there is no good time to get prostate cancer. I was in my 50s, and for me, my 50s were a decade of challenge in that our last pets died, the cat and the dog. My father had just died in 1999 of cancer. So in 2001, when my husband was diagnosed, I guess I was at the same time scared, angry, not sure where I was in my faith journey, because where was God in this? I thought maybe an empty nest and moving into a new decade. Of course, he had his surgery 2 weeks after the terrible 9/11 events. So the decade of the new millennium started off with a real negative effect on me. So I had to get my act together. So my default mode for self-preservation and sanity is either music or art. So I continued getting deep into that. But at the same time, just didn't know whether to think I was going to be a widow soon. I mean, just was a scary time. Fortunately, Dave is he's the opposite on the end of the emotional scale for me. I go off and flail about and panic easily, and that's why he's the scientist and I'm the artist, because he's very measured and takes things in his stride, knows there's always another answer to the next question, and pursues and knew where to pursue the best information. And he started us going to conferences that specialized in prostate cancer. So I began to learn that, one, I was not alone in this. There's a whole community, although it was a sorority I didn't want to join. But like he said, you're in it now, so make the best of it. And we did. We started going to conferences in California, which meant a bit of travel every year. But we tried to make the best of that too. So every conference, we met new people, we met new doctors, we were able to hear the latest research. And so for us, really, prostate cancer opened a door to a journey that became a lifestyle. It put us closer together in that, whereas I guess even while we were raising our children, we kind of had our own directions in which we went. And yes, our paths crossed and we had a good relationship, but nothing like the closeness that we were going to be thrown into with prostate cancer. Because there are things you need to talk about once you get prostate cancer that maybe or maybe not, we would have actually tried to improve our intimate relationships. When you don't have to, you just go with the flow and get into routines that might become too routine. So now we were kind of reinventing how we acted on our being together with each other. And we had the common interest of the prostate cancer. Now, I won't be totally truthful if I don't say that I resisted getting dragged into the prostate cancer world. But once I realized I had some gifts to offer, and if this is part of the journey, then why not contribute when I could? And part of my journey is a spiritual journey. And I think that started from childhood when I had myself a diagnosis at age 5 that I was just not going to live. But I think starting then, I realized that I tapped into a resource of spiritual depth that got me through a lot of hard times. And so prostate cancer was one more chance to say, well, what do I not now know about God, or however you name your higher power? But for me, the name was God at the time, and still continues to be, although I've branched out from that. And I actually immersed myself in a 3-year program, which at the time, all I knew is I wanted a wider spiritual base to draw from. I ended up on the end of that 3-year commitment as a certified spiritual director, which again, basically it means the spirit is alive and directing each one of us if we tap into it. And so once I said, I think I could try that. It's like, you build it, they will come. You open the door to women who can come now with their husbands or partners to a support group meeting, and the women have their own time and their own place and their own space to be honest with each other. And it was like floodgates opened. People needed a place to come and know that they weren't alone. So then that grew from there into taking phone calls for Us Too. We got connected with Us Too.
What is Us Too?
Us Too is, there are a few organizations out there, nonprofits, that have purposes that help prostate cancer people in their journey. And Us Too is the single one that we know about that offers support groups. It also, their SCA Blue is their sort of motto. So support, education, and advocacy for prostate cancer survivors and their families. Their resources are great. Us2, USTOO.org website is full of all kinds of information and videos and connections to people and places that you can get good information. But my little part in this is that they were wanting to offer specifically for women, and this is just in the last couple of years, a place to come and talk. So we started with the phone conference calls. I was always frustrated by that because I don't like to talk on the phone. And it's especially hard if you've got 8 people on a phone call and it's like, well, who's talking? You have to tell me. I can't see you. So name yourself before you start talking. Well, if I had to say my name at the beginning of every time I entered the conversation, it's a little awkward. So I was actually personally thrilled when they were willing to switch over and do Zoom. And this was at the beginning, actually, even before COVID, we were doing Zoom. And so now we can have everybody's face on the screen. We can have people from all over the country make connections with each other and keep those connections, because when you see somebody, it becomes a better feel for how you're understanding where they're coming from. So I've been doing that. I guess I've been doing a support group in one way or another since 2009. And again, I learned from them as much as, my job for that is holding space. It's just giving the opportunity for people who support each other to come in a safe environment where we promise them this is confidential. Nobody shares beyond this group. It's a place you can come and say what you can't say to anybody else. And the importance of that is, well, I could go in a few directions with that, but what I'm going to say now is the importance of women being able to come and talk with other women is that there are things that we hold in our heart and in our emotion that it's not that we're trying to hide from our husbands, but sometimes there are things that you just want to air out without disturbing another person's sense of well-being. So women understand women. That's just the way that works. And it's been a very fruitful experience. I wouldn't have known going into it that I would have come this far and gotten this deep, but I've gone from taking a call once a month to now I have one group that really has melded, and we meet every week on a Wednesday. These are ladies whose husbands all have stage 4 cancer, and they are in deep events one week after the other, and that one can come to the other and say, and what happened to your husband after this? And it's like, it doesn't get to be so scary when you can hear somebody else say, okay, and yeah, we did that last week, but we survived it, and it does get better. And the other thing that we've learned through our experience is that every single thing that comes up in prostate cancer, there's somebody out there in the research world working on it. And even from the time that Dave was diagnosed, things have improved. The radiation he had in, was it 08 or 09, wasn't even available back in 01 when he had his surgery. So you move into whatever is the next best thing for you. Now they've got this ADT that you can take by pill, so you don't have to have the injection. They're doing so much more with scans so that you can find out sooner what you're dealing with and knock it out in the earlier stage. So there's so much hope. And I think, maybe that's the biggest message in all of this is there needs to be a place where people can get together, be honest with what's going on, but also come away feeling like they can smile again, they can breathe again, they can let go of some of their tight-fisted, anxious feelings, because there is a next logical process where there's a lot of possibility.
Okay, Kathie, so you and I obviously are part of the Prostate Cancer Wives Club. So when Elle was diagnosed, I've mentioned in previous podcasts that I had a tremendous sense of sadness for him, not for myself. And I think your emotions were a little different, and we all, everybody experienced it differently. But for me, I didn't have like anger or anything. I never felt bad for myself. I just felt bad for him. I was really, really sad. So, a part of the organization and the groups that you're with, what are some of the emotions that the wives are experiencing? Because for me, and I don't know what David's lifestyle was, but Elle, extremely active. He goes to the gym, he's in the yard. He rides his bike on a bike trail for 10 miles, on Saturdays. And for me, only thing I could see was his lifestyle is getting ready to change. It's going to be so different for him. So my sadness was for him in the way that his life was going to change. I guess I put myself on the back burner, as I found out in a previous podcast with a family therapist. So I guess I put my emotions on the back burner, but immediately it was all about him. I just felt sad. So if you could just, tell just some of the emotions that you're finding that the women are experiencing through their husbands being diagnosed with prostate cancer.
Well, I think I could say that every emotion you could possibly name comes up sooner or later. Sadness, for sure. And I think the sadness that I felt was almost coupled with a feeling of, this is not fair. So it was sad for us both. And again, prostate cancer is a couple's disease. Yes, it affects the women just as much as the men. Well, not just as much, but in a different way. Yes. But as a couple, it affects you both. And so some of the sadness and some of the frustration and some of the anger and annoyance from the women that I'm talking to, a lot of it centers around men who, this is a huge blow to their self-worth and identity. And so some of the men, and this crosses the gamut of, it's not just Black men, it's not just any particular demographic of men, but some men in every demographic just don't want to talk about it. They want to take care of it, get it done, walk out the door and say it's behind me. And because of that, they don't want their wives to tell anybody. And that would mean they don't tell their children, even if they have adult children living at home, even if they have sons. No, you're not allowed to tell. Not allowed to tell the neighbors, not allowed to tell your friends at church, not allowed to tell your sister, your other relatives. No, this is this huge secret, which then, in the experiences that I've seen, it creates an enormous burden for the wife, because where can she go with all of this frustration, all of this not knowing, all of this wishing to get more information? And women are good researchers. They are on the internet, they are looking stuff up, they are finding things out. And when the husband doesn't want to have that discussion with her, doesn't even want her to go to the doctor's visit with him, frustrated, annoyed, angry, all of that, and definitely sad. But on the other hand, I have women who have this totally other experience because their husbands are very open about it, and they tell everybody, and they want to tell their sons so that they get checked early enough, because now you've got it in your heritage. They want to tell their neighbors, because pretty soon you find out, well, this neighbor and that neighbor, they've had an experience that they haven't talked about. So once you're able to cross that barrier and open up the communication, then it's a better experience for everybody. But the other part of the emotional experience is when the men are experiencing from usually the ADT, but from some of the other treatments as well.
What is the ADT? Tell us.
So the androgen deprivation therapy. We start using initials, and honestly, between the treatments and the drugs and all the long names for things, and you end up using shortcut terms for things that are mouthful otherwise. So, and people call it hormone treatment, but it's actually removing hormones, not adding hormones. So the men get treatments, and it could be an injection, or now it could be a pill. It used to be a just cut off your testicles. So at least they've gotten beyond that.
Did you literally mean cut them off?
Oh yeah, orchiectomy. Yep.
Wow.
That was the old time treatment.
They call that a eunuch in the Bible, I think.
Yeah.
They did. Let me just say that related to removing your sex hormone, and whether it's women losing it during menopause or men losing it because of this treatment, we get moody. We get difficult to live with. There are new ways of being in a relationship that now take people by surprise. And it's like, well, how do I deal with that? He didn't used to get angry when I said something in passing, or if I tried to pat him on the back. It's like, well, who is this monster I'm living with that's not the person that I knew before all this started? I mean, I think the frustration that men feel with especially if you have the incontinence coupled with the impotence and the erectile dysfunction, they lose their sense of self-worth, and they begin to kind of dig a little hole for themselves. And how do wives pull men out of that? I've sat with one wife, I remember, in a coffee shop while her husband went for acupuncture because he was so desperate. He needed to get out of this downward spiral of depression. And I mean, men sitting around weeping is not what wives are used to seeing. So there's a lot of complicated emotional stuff that goes on. My personal opinion is that every team of doctors and helpful professionals that get you through this experience should include a sex counselor, a marriage counselor, some kind of professional psychotherapist who can listen to the deeper emotions and help you work through those, because people turn to drink, people turn to other behaviors that just don't fit what have created the marriage up to that point. And both the wives and the husbands, and oftentimes the children who are witness to all this, need the kind of help that keeps you grounded. And yeah, life is difficult. And part of it, the big key, the main word really here is communication. Just don't stop communicating honestly as a couple. You need that.
Dave, one of the themes I guess we had for the show today was the long haulers. You guys have been in this for 20 plus years. And from your perspective, what would you say to the couples and the individuals or whoever is pending or thinking about or going through this procedure? What is your overall perspective dealing with this for the past 20 plus years? What would you have to say to someone who's wakes up one day and finds themselves in this situation? What is your perspective on that?
Most men go along, as Kathie said, in their lives not worrying about this till suddenly, boom, they've got a disease. Now, a lot comes maybe before that. One is that person been going to the doctor regularly for other things? Probably the answer to that is most men probably haven't, unless they've got some symptom. And so once they're diagnosed, now the decisions come. Now, most men say, oh, we've got to do something right away. Well, in most cases, in prostate cancer, that's not necessarily a requirement. You've got time to make a decision. And this is where support groups can come in and help in a great way, because they can talk to other men who have gone through this and how they made their decisions. Most men, I want to say unfortunately, take the doctors that has done the biopsy and now has given the results that you have cancer. They say, okay, what are we going to do? And the doctor says, well, here's what you can do. You can do surgery, you can do radiation, etc. But in many cases, in most cases, that doctor is a urologist, a urological surgeon. And so they get the first dibs on doing surgery, which may or may not be the best approach for that patient, depending on a number of other things. So depending on what the initial biopsy is, if you're given a really bad diagnosis with a high Gleason score and other situations, you really need to have on their team a medical oncologist. Most men don't do this because, one, they don't know what's a medical oncologist, and because they don't have a vested interest in surgery or radiation. Usually you would have to get them through some of the large academic centers, especially ones that might focus on urological cancers, prostate cancer specifically. And there aren't a lot of those, but you need that. For the majority of men, they don't need that. They can begin to make their decisions based on talking to a urologist, talking to a radiologist, looking at the different opportunities, and including what's called active surveillance. If you have a low enough form of the cancer, you're not going to necessarily need to have surgery or radiation. Active surveillance means that you work with the doctor, have a PSA tested probably once every 3 months or a few years. And if they see the PSA going up and you may need other tests, that's the time to decide. But most men may jump into it and say, well, the doctor said this, okay, this is what I'm going to do. The man is the one that has the disease. You're the patient, so you get to make the final decision. You don't have to accept the decision of the doctor. If for whatever reason you're not pleased with that doctor because of, get a second opinion. That can be done. Many people don't know, there were discussion at the beginning of what the statistics are in the United States, and both in the total population and in the Black population. Most people don't realize prostate cancer is the number 2 cancer killer of men after lung cancer. There are 30,000 men a year in the United States that die of prostate cancer, but there are between 200,000 and 300,000 that are diagnosed with prostate cancer. So percentage-wise, it's not huge, but it is certainly larger than other tumor forms. It's 30,000 men a year is like 100 jumbo jets going down with 300 passengers at a time throughout the year. Now, those numbers are small when you look at what's happening in COVID, where we're up to 500,000 plus, but it's still a major problem. So it's important that you work closely with the doctor and not just go away and say, oh, fine, we'll see what happens. But if a man chooses active surveillance, and that's based on one, what your Gleason score was, what your PSA was, and a variety of other things. And then you have to work closely with that doctor. I've known men that have been on active surveillance for years, and I've known others that after a year or two, they say, well, I'm getting too nervous. I want to have something done. And so they go ahead with surgery or radiation to stop it. But active surveillance is just in the last 10 years has grown tremendously, where that choice didn't really exist a number of years ago. So I think it's important that the man becomes an active participant in decisions, a man and his spouse or partner, that they work together, since it is a, quote, couple's disease, in making decisions on what they think is the best approach. You know, in my case, you say, well, I'm 20 years out, so that's great. Well, I was fortunate in that the degree of my cancer was not in the high end, and so it was manageable with the ways that I've chosen to have things done and worked on through the years. And, I will continue to have my PSA monitored. A lot of people say, well, you had your prostate out. How is it possible that your PSA is going up? Well, if it's going up, that means there's some tumor cells somewhere.
ProstateCancerRealTalk.com. ProstateCancerRealTalk.com. And if you want to contact Ellen Shay, Ellen Shay at ProstateCancerRealTalk.com. And for information on today's guests and all of our guests, once again, ProstateCancerRealTalk.com.
As I was going over the show today, the word that kept coming to my mind as it pertains to Dave and Kathie, the word that came to my mind is hope. All right. Because you have now a couple who first was diagnosed with this 20 years ago. And I think that when you get that diagnosis from the doctor, it hits you like a brick. You know, you experience a feeling that you've never felt before. And it's a whole new thing. And like Dave just said, the instinct in many cases is, I'm going to die. Okay. And that is not the case, as demonstrated by the journey that Kathie and Dave have been on. So as we draw to conclusion here, I want to hear back from Kathie in terms of any parting words that she might want to share about our discussion today, any messaging or advice that she has for the wives and the families of the men who are dealing with this.
Thanks, Elle, and Shay, too, for your wisdom in all this. But the one thing I realize I have not mentioned is the feeling of helplessness at the beginning. What can I do to make things better? And once I found my purpose in cooking and improving our nutrition, because I did research and looked into what's the best diet for prostate cancer. Well, it turns out the best diet for prostate cancer is the same diet that's good for heart health. And so the Mediterranean diet, looking into what that involved, of course, I taught Spanish for all those years, so I knew a lot about the Mediterranean and Spain. So learning how to cook, eating more fish, less red meat, more vegetables, olive oil to the exclusion of other not so good oils. There's a lot to learn about nutrition. Many of the cancer communities around, there is actually one called the Cancer Support Community. In some places it's called Gilda's Club, but they are good resources for, I get my yoga class there. They have cooking classes. They have different kinds of other events that support cancers of all kinds. But to be aware in your community what you can tap into and then take advantage of it, because much of this is free. Much of this is available now that it's on virtual platforms. I can be in Ohio attending an event in California. It's okay, and vice versa. But the two main things that I personally took on as a way to be actively involved in my husband's well-being is in the nutrition and exercise. We do walk, we do take bike rides, we love to be outdoors. He's been in the Boy Scout on that team for his whole life since he was an almost Eagle Scout as a teen, but always been active in the role of getting boys in the community involved in healthy lifestyles. So, promoting that kind of exercise and good eating and just generally good health habits beyond prostate cancer. And for women, the important thing is, yes, it's all about him, but no, it's not, because if you don't take care of yourself, then what good are you to him? So the self-care is huge, and allow yourself time off. If a nap is what you need, take it. If a little time alone just to do your art or play your music or take a walk alone in the neighborhood and notice the bird song, do it, because your mental health, your emotional health contributes to your husband's well-being.
And again, you can go to our website to make yourself aware of these various resources. And also, if you want to reach out to Dave and Kathie, we'll have their contact information available as well. Dave, what do you think about what we've done today? And do you have any closing thoughts or comments you'd like to make, advice to our listeners?
Yes, the one thing that I would advise every man that has been diagnosed and ultimately treated is to know and say that is not the end. In other words, a lot of men say, okay, I've had surgery, I'm cured. I've had radiation, I'm cured. And they don't continue to follow through. It's very important once you've had the diagnosis of that, once you've been treated, to maintain for the rest of your life following it with PSAs on a regular basis, but then ultimately once a year, so that you can watch out for a not cure. You may or may not have been cured. I never, as a cancer researcher, like to use that word. What you're in is theoretically a long-term remission, which can go on for your whole life. You may never have a recurrence, although you might have some tumor cells there. Continue to be diligent and observant. We've said here that the first thing is a lot of people say, well, I've got cancer, I'm going to die. Well, we're all going to die. We know that. We don't know of what or when, but ultimately, physical death will occur for everyone. Yet, we try to keep in touch with diseases that we can have some control of that might lead to death that involve much pain and suffering. So be careful, follow your medical advice, but again, you as the individual are the one that has to do that. And in couples cases, the couples case making those decisions. So yes, search out for support groups in your area. Those of you, Elle, in the Chicago area are very fortunate that US Too has its headquarters there in LaGrange. And they are, of course, most things are virtual now, but they support over 200 support groups around the U.S. and overseas. There is one support group on their site that is virtual all the time. It has been ever since they organized, and people can call from anywhere in the country and participate in that. You don't have to be there in case you're not in an area where a physical support group is, or you don't want to sit with a group of men and discuss things.
I just want to thank Dave and Kathie for uplifting and bringing such great joy today. You guys rock. You're awesome. Thank you so much. And Dave, I just really want to thank you for your service. I come from a huge military family. So thank you so much for your service. And you guys rock. Thank you so much for being on the show today. And you uplifted me. Elle case is not that bad, and I'm uplifted from the show. So I really appreciate it, and I thank you guys so very much for being with our listeners today.
I'm just going to close by again thanking Dave and Kathie. And you heard us talk about the group US Too. Met them through US Too. You can find out more about that on our website. And I will say that it appears that we are going to have a ongoing partnership with US Too and our podcast. We'll be having them on to talk about some of their programs and some of the special things that they're doing. So, we just want this podcast to be a voice and a place where people can come, a community for those of us who are going through, as Dave put it to me, the club that nobody wants to join. But I will say that it opens up your horizons. You meet a lot of great people, like we met Dave and Kathie, who we would not have met had it not been for prostate cancer. So that's a good thing. And so some good things can come from this experience.
Thank you, guys.
To reach our show, email Elle and Shay at prostatecancerrealtalk.com. That's EL and Shay, SHAY, at prostatecancerrealtalk.com.